Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I am going to tell you, I am also going to give you all the information on which I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is a 2001 American satirical stoner buddy comedy film. Written, co-edited, and directed by Kevin Smith and produced and co-edited by Scott Mosier. The film is the fifth set in the Mewes universe, a growing collection of characters and settings that developed out of Smith's cult favorite Clerks. It stars Jason Mewes and Smith respectively as the two eponymous characters. The film also stars Shannon Elizabeth, Jason Lee, Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Will Ferrell, Eliza Dushku, Ali Larter, and Chris Rock, among many others, most of which in cameo appearances. The title and logo for Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back are direct references to The Empire Strikes Back. Originally intended to be the last film set in the Askew universe, or to feature Jay and Silent Bob, Strike Back features many characters from the previous Askew films, some in dual roles and/or reprising roles from the previous 4 entries. The film received mixed reviews from critics. Smith announced in February 2017 that he was writing a sequel called Jay and Silent Bob Reboot and started filming in February 2019 and was released on October 15 that same year. From February to June 2019, Smith additionally readapted the plot of the film to the character of Mindy McCready, Hit Girl, in the relaunched Image comic book series, titled Hit Girl, The Golden Rage of Hollywood, with Dave Lazowski filling the role of Banky Edwards. Plot: Dante Hicks and Randall Graves put a restraining order on Jay and Silent Bob, finally fed up with their drug-dealing antics outside the strip mall they work at, after the duo tell a pair of teenagers that they were married in a Star Wars-themed wedding. Not allowed within 100 feet of the strip mall for at least a year. Jay and Silent Bob visit Brody Bruce at his comic shop, where they learn that Miramax Films is adapting Bluntman and Chronic, the comic book based on their likenesses. The pair visit Holden McNeil, co-creator and co-writer of Bluntman and Chronic, and demand that he give them their royalty money from the film, but Holden explains he sold his half of the rights to co-creator and artist Banky Edwards. Seeing the film's negative reception online, the pair set out for Hollywood to prevent the film from ruining their image, or at least to receive the royalties owed to them. En route, they befriend an animal liberation group: Justice, Sissy, Missy, Chrissy, and Brent. The organization is a front. Brent is a patsy, who will free animals from a laboratory as a diversion while the girls rob a diamond depository. Jay throws Brent out of their van to get closer to Justice, to whom he is attracted to. Justice is fond of the pair, but reluctantly accepts them as new patsies. While the girls steal the diamonds, Jay and Silent Bob free the animals, stealing an orangutan named Suzanne. They escape as the police arrive and the van explodes, believing the girls have perished. Federal Wildlife Marshal Willen Hawley, whose name is taken from Land of the Lost characters, arrives at the crime scene. Oblivious to the diamond heist, he claims jurisdiction due to the escaped animals, all of which have been recovered but Suzanne. The police find footage of a video Sissy made of Jay claiming to be the Clit Commander, with CLIT edited to be an acronym for Coalition for the Liberation of Itinerant Tree Dwellers. Willen Hawley declares the crime an act of terrorism and calls for backup to hunt the 2 most dangerous men on the planet. He finds Jay and Silent Bob at a diner near Vasquez Rocks and chases them into the sewer system of a nearby dam. Suzanne helps the duo in losing Willen Hawley by luring him off the dam, but is subsequently abducted by a Hollywood animal acting agency. The duo then hitch a ride and arrive in Hollywood, and eventually the Miramax lot. Chased by a team of security guards through the lot and several movie sets, including Good Will Hunting 2 Hunting Season, and reclaiming Suzanne from the set of Scream 4, Jay and Silent Bob end up in the dressing room of Jason Biggs and James Van Der Beek, the actors playing Bluntman and Chronic respectively in the film. Suzanne beats up the actors, knocking them out, and Jay and Silent Bob assume the roles while Van Der Beek and Biggs are arrested after getting mistaken for the duo. Meeting the film's anti-white director, Chaka Luther King, who mistakes them for Biggs and Van Der Beek's stunt doubles, Jay and Silent Bob are then escorted onto the set and forced to fight Mark Hamill, playing the supervillain of the film Cockknocker, a combination of Hamill's roles as the Joker, the Trickster, and Luke Skywalker. In a Star Wars-esque battle, Will and Holly, armed with a shotgun, arrives to capture the pair, but Justice protects them, admitting the Clit organization was only a diversion. The other thieves arrive, and a climactic gunfight ensues. Jay and Silent Bob locate Banky and demand that he shut down production of the movie. Banky refuses on account of both the large sum of money Miramax offered him for the film and that the internet will continue to troll them regardless. Silent Bob then informs Banky that he violated their original likeness rights contract by selling the film rights of Bluntman and Chronic to Miramax without their permission, and therefore could face legal trouble if he doesn't give them their legally entitled royalties. Banky finally relents and agrees to give the duo half of his payment for the film. Justice then turns herself and her former team in to Will and Holly in exchange for a shorter sentence and dropping the charges on Jay and Silent Bob. The duo spend their royalty money locating everyone who mocked them, their characters, and the movie on the internet, including children and members of the clergy, and travel to assault them. The scene cuts to the El Rey Theater, where a bunch of people exit, including Dante, Randall, Banky, Steve Dave Polsky, Walt, the Fanboy, Grover, Willem Black, Hooper Lamont, and sisters Alyssa and Trisha Jones, having just watched the Bluntman and Chronic movie, to poor reception. Jay and Silent Bob, accompanied by Justice and Will and Holly, now an FBI agent, go across the street to enjoy the after-party, featuring a performance from Morris Day and The Time. After the credits, God, Dogma closes the View Askew universe book. Cast Jason Mewes as Jay Chronic, Kevin Smith as Silent Bob Bluntman, Ben Affleck as himself, Holden McNeil, Chucky Sullivan, voice of Echo Bass, guard over radio, Jason Lee as Brody Bruce, Banky Edwards, Shannon Elizabeth as Justice, Eliza Dushku as Sissy Alley, Larder as Chrissy, Jennifer Schwalbach as Missy, Will Ferrell as Federal Wildlife Marshal Will and Holly, Matt Damon as himself, Will Hunting, Brian O'Halloran as Dante Hicks, Jeff Anderson as Randall Graves, Judd Nelson as Sheriff George Carlin as Hitchhiker, Carrie Fisher as Nun, Sean William Scott as Brent, Jon Stewart as Reg Hartner, Tracy Morgan as Pumpkin Escobar, Chris Rock as Chaka Luther King, Jamie Kennedy as Chaka's production assistant, Mark Hamill as himself, Cockknocker, voice of Scooby-Doo, Mark Blucas as Fred lookalike, Matthew James as Shaggy lookalike Jane, Sylvia as Velma lookalike, Carmen Llewellyn as Daphne lookalike, Diedrich Bader as Gordon the Miramax security guard, Brian Johnson as Steve Dave Polsky, Walter Flanagan as Walter the Fanboy Grover, Scott Mosier as Willem Black, Good Will Hunting 2 assistant director Renee Humphrey as Trisha Jones, Joey Lauren Adams as Alyssa Jones, Dwight Ewell as Hooper Lamont Hooper X, Scott William Winters as himself, Clark William B. Davis uncredited cameo as the Smoking Man, Joe Quesada uncredited cameo as Pizza Delivery Man, Alanis Morris cameo as God. Additionally, Wes Craven, Jules Asner, Steve Kometko, Gus Van Sant, Jason Biggs, James Van Der Beek, Shannon Doherty, and Morris Day all appear as themselves.
Production. The film's plot was heavily inspired by Chasing Dogma, a comic book miniseries that Smith wrote in 1998 and 1999 to explore events that happened in the Ask universe between Chasing Amy and Dogma. The film was originally titled View Askew 5, and the title was changed to Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Filming began on January 14, 2001, and ended on April 19, 2001. Filming took place in New Jersey, and mostly in California. On his podcast, Jay and Silent Bob Get Old, Kevin Smith explained at length about how much of a headache the film was to make, mostly owing to Jason Mewes' drug and alcohol abuse turning him into a ticking time bomb, which threatened to shut the project down at any moment. During pre-production, Mewes would have constant mood swings due to heroin withdrawal, to the point that Smith actually threw him out of his car on their way to the set one day. Mewes would compensate for his lack of drugs by drinking heavily after every day of shooting and nearly got into a fist fight with producer Scott Mosier when he had to come back one night for a reshoot while drunk. When filming wrapped, Smith told Mewes point blank to get sober or he would never speak to him again. Release box office, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back grossed $30.1 million in the United States and Canada and $3.7 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $33.8 million against a production budget of $22 million. The film grossed $11 million in its opening weekend, finishing third at the box office behind two other comedy sequels, American Pie 2, $12.5 million, and Rush Hour 2, $11.6 million. Critical reception. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 52% based on 151 reviews, with an average rating of 5.6/10. The site's critical consensus reads, "Fans can expect a good laugh as cast from Smith's previous films reunite for Jay and Silent Bob's last beau. The loose plotting and crude language may be too much for others, though." On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 51 out of 100, based on 31 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale. Roger Ebert gave the film 3 out of 4 stars, writing that, "Whether you will like Jay and Silent Bob depends on who you are. Kevin Smith's movies are either made specifically for you or specifically not made for you." Adam Smith of Empire gave the film 3/5 stars, writing that, "When it's good, it's very, very good, but when it's bad, it's offensive," and noting that the gag hit-miss ratio is really only about 50-50. Scott Tobias of the AV Club wrote that, even at a slim 95 minutes, Jay and Silent Bob lets initially funny scenes trail off into long-winded monologues and silly digressions. And Elvis Mitchell of the New York Times called the film maybe the greatest picture ever made for 14-year-old boys. Mr. Smith may have hit his target, but he aimed very low. 1819. In August 2001, Mike Schultz of River City's Reader wrote that, "For sheer laughs, both mindless and incredibly smart, nothing since 1997's Waiting for Guffman has even compared." Home media Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back was released on VHS and on a 2-disc DVD set on February 26, 2002, by Dimension Home Entertainment as a part of their Dimension Collectors series, presented in its original 2.35:1 widescreen aspect ratio. Among the bonus features on the DVD is an audio commentary by Smith, Mosier, and Mewes, 42 deleted, extended, and alternate scenes, music videos for Stroke 9's Kick Some Ass and Afroman's Because I Got High, storyboards, a gag reel, a behind-the-scenes special, still galleries, cast and crew filmographies, and TV spots. A Blu-ray version of the film was released on September 19, 2006, with all features carried over from the DVD. As for 2020, the film's home media distribution has been handled by Paramount Pictures Home Entertainment, following Paramount Global's purchase of 49% of Miramax, which includes Dimension Films' pre-2006 film and television catalog. Soundtrack music from the Dimension motion picture, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. The soundtrack to the film was released on August 14, 2001 by Universal Records. Verace Sarabande released the original score by James L. Venable. It alternates film dialogue with songs of various genres that appear in the film. It features the 2001 Afroman hit Because I Got High, whose music video featured the characters Jay and Silent Bob. Tube of Wonderful was previously used as the theme song from Smith's 1997 film Chasing Amy. The Movie Answer Man column got a question earlier this year about whether movie characters know about other movie characters and movies. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is like an answer to that question. It is becoming clear that the film universe of Kevin Smith is interconnected, that characters from one movie can expect to run into characters from another. Like Faulkner's Yoknapatawpha County, Smithland has a permanent population, even though we may not meet all of them in every movie. The connecting threads, apparently, are Jay and Silent Bob, who we met in Smith's first movie, Clerks, where they were permanently stationed outside a convenience store, ostensibly pot dealers, more accurately waiting for something to happen. They moved inside in Mallrats, had their lives ripped off to make a comic book in Chasing Amy, and risked salvation in Dogma. Having visited all of Smith's other movies, they are now given their own, in which characters and stars from the earlier pictures return the favor. Consider the metaphysics. Ben Affleck and Matt Damon appear as themselves in this movie, making a sequel to their movie Good Will Hunting. And then we go into the fourth dimension and begin to suspect wormholes in the plot, because they also starred in Dogma, in which Chris Rock played an angel, and now he turns up in Jay and Silent Bob as the director of Bluntman and Chronic, which is the movie based on the lives of Jay and Silent Bob, which is an adaptation of the comic book created in Chasing Amy. And before he appears as himself, Affleck appears as Holden, his Chasing Amy character, and introduces Jay and Silent Bob to the internet. And look, isn't that Joey Lauren Adams from Chasing Amy? And hey, wasn't Ben Affleck one of the comic artists in Chasing Amy? And while Affleck does not play his Chasing Amy character in Jay and Silent Bob, Jason Lee, the co-creator of the Bluntman comic, does, turning up in this one to warn Jay and Silent Bob that the comic is being made into a movie by Miramax. And Miramax is the studio releasing this movie, which Jay and Silent Bob will be seen as a self-indulgence by Kevin Smith to those outside the circle of his films, and by those within it as Kevin Smith's indulgence to them. And don't get me started on whether it's plenary or temporal. This is one of those movies where the inmates take over the asylum, by which I mean that the director was obviously unrestrained by any timid notions of reaching the biggest possible audience, and allowed to make an in-joke of epic proportions. Like the Monty Python movies, it depends for full enjoyment on your encyclopedia knowledge of the world that generated it. The story begins more or less at birth, as we discover that Jay, Jason Mewes, and Silent Bob, Kevin Smith, were deposited as infants in front of the convenience store in Clerks, and have more or less been there ever since. Now a restraining order has encouraged them to budge, and in a comic book store they run into Banky Edwards, Jason Lee, who based his Bluntman and Chronic comic on them, and now informs them it's been sold to Miramax. Jay. Miramax? I thought they only made classy pictures like The Piano, or The Crying Game. Banky. After they made She's All That? Everything went to hell. Jay and Silent Bob decide to hitchhike to the coast and encounter George Carlin as a hitchhiker who tells them of the one thing guaranteed to get you a ride, and Carrie Fisher as a nun who represents an exception to Carlin's advice. Then they get a ride from 4 animal activist babes: Shannon Elizabeth, Eliza Dushku, Ali Larder, and Jennifer Smith, who pose as friends but want to exploit them in the theft of a monkey. Once in Los Angeles, we and they go through the looking glass into a world where director Gus Van Sant, Affleck, and Damon appear as themselves on the set of Good Will Hunting, and Rock is the race card-playing director of the Bluntman movie, which stars James Van Der Beek and Jason Biggs as Jay and Silent Bob. And Silent Bob finally arrives at the monologue we patiently await in every picture, and reveals himself to be as least as articulate as Chris Matthews. The charm of a Kevin Smith movie is that it assumes you do not enter the theater as a blank slate. Chasing Amy assumes a little knowledge of the world of serious comic books and collectors. Dogma required you to know something about Catholic theology, and Jay and Silent Bob has moments like the one where the Affleck character defines the internet for Jay. It's a place used the world over, where people can come together to bitch about movies and share pornography together. This is a much more sophisticated idea of the net than we find in high-tech cyber thrillers, where the net is a place that makes your computer beep a lot. Whether you will like Jay and Silent Bob depends on who you are. Most movies are made for everybody. Kevin Smith's movies are either made specifically for you or specifically not made for you. If you read this review without a smile or a nod of recognition, I would recommend Rush Hour 2, which is for everybody or nobody, you tell me. Note, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Discrimination has chosen the wrong target in attacking Jay and Silent Bob for alleged anti-gay material. GLAAD should give audiences credit for enough intelligence to know the difference between satire and bigotry. Smith agreed to add a disclaimer to the end of the movie saying the use of anti-gay slurs in real life is not acceptable. As if this will A, come as news, or B, act as a wake-up call for those who use them. But he refused to apologize for his film, which describes Jay and Silent Bob as hetero-life partners, and said in a statement, "I'm not sorry because I didn't make the jokes at the expense of the gay community. I made jokes at the expense of two characters who neither I nor the audience have ever held up to be paragons of intellect. They're idiots. J. Review Askew, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, 2001. November 10th, 2022. Mike. No matter what you might think of Kevin Smith, whether you love his movies or despise them, there's one thing about him that you have to admire, at least in some small way. His relationship with his fan base. In the late 90s, as Clerks and Mallrats were finding their audience on videotape, Smith's View Askew website and message board became a virtual hangout for the OG fans. They could interact with Smith directly, who used the platform to answer questions about his movies and drop hints and advance news of what he was working on. None of Smith's movies were ever huge financial hits, at least by Hollywood standards, but his loyal viewers have been incredibly devoted from the start, and by the turn of the millennium, Smith was well aware of this. He's always been extremely grateful for his fans, and even this early into his career, he realized who his core audience was and how he should cater to them. This is a creative ethos that would kick into high gear with the creation of his podcast network and the films that followed. But in 2001, we got a little taste of Smith's gratitude with a special cinematic gift he created just for the hardcore View Askew heads. After the mini shitstorm that Dogma generated, Kevin Smith wasn't in the best mood to handle any big topics for his next movie, so instead he went the complete opposite direction. A big, dumb live-action cartoon promoting his dim-witted dynamic duo from side characters to the main event. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is a $22 million in-joke, a movie filled to the brim with callbacks and references to Smith's previous 4 films. A cinematic love letter to his fan base to thank them for all the support they've given him in his career. It's not so deep that I don't think someone who hasn't seen the other movies wouldn't be able to follow this one. But I definitely consider it a bar for entry. I don't see how someone completely unfamiliar the other View Askew movies could really get into this one. Even at the height of my Smith fandom in high school, I didn't love this movie, but I still owned the DVD and enjoyed it on the whole for the most part. There's some degree of charm to something this self-indulgent, towards a piece of art that aims this incredibly low. But as a comedy, I honestly can't say it's very good, and I found myself growing increasingly disinterested in it as it crawled along. After years of loitering and dealing in front of the quick stop, Jay and Silent Bob are finally issued a restraining order, driving them from the property. Visiting Mallrats' Brody's comic shop, they are shocked to learn that Bluntman and Chronic, the superhero comic book based upon their likenesses, is being turned into a feature film. Tracking down Chasing Amy's Holden for more details, they discover the horrors of internet forum posting, finding a whole slew of comments talking about how terrible a Bluntman movie would be and how much Jay and Silent Bob suck ass. Fearing their reputations are in jeopardy, Jay and Bob hitch it to Hollywood to stop the film from being made. In their travels, Jay meets and quickly falls in love with a young woman named Justice and gains a traveling partner in the form of a rescued orangutan, all before finally getting to LA and running wild on the Miramax lot. The first 10 minutes of the movie are like a star tour through Kevin Smith's original trilogy, as we start at the quick stop, where we see Dante and Randall in color. And after that, we're at Brody's Secret Stash, filmed at Smith's actual comic book store in Red Bank, NJ. In a nice bit of background story, we see a giant blow-up, a Variety article behind the counter, Brody bolts, explaining why he's not still hosting The Tonight Show as we saw in the Mallrats epilogue. Then we're hanging with Holden McNeil and seeing what he's up to. It's kind of neat in concept, like Jay and Bob are wandering through the first 3 movies before setting off on their own adventure. The movie wastes no time dropping in refrains of the most classic lines. "I'm not even supposed to be here today," which is repeated later in the film. "Would you like a chocolate-covered pretzel?" which is repeated later in the film. "Would you like a chocolate-covered pretzel?" Setting up that this film is basically going to be filled with references like this. Holden greets Jay and Bob by quoting word for word what Jay told him when they met at the diner in Chasing Amy. It all feels like an early sign of the rise of reference humor that plagues modern-day franchises. paying homage in recreating beloved moments by trotting out legacy actors to say lines from the older movies for fans to stand up and cheer at. It's pretty lame writing, but at least there's a simple innocence to when Kevin Smith does it versus some $200 million nostalgia jerk-offs like Jurassic World or the new Star Wars trilogy. So finally, after 4 films in the periphery, Jay and Silent Bob are in the driver's seat as our protagonists. But can they carry a movie? Are they compelling leads? This may be shocking to hear, but not really. Jay is pretty much our focal character, for obvious reasons, and he does start to wear out his welcome around halfway into the movie. To be fair, in terms of crafting a story around a stupid sex loudmouth, I don't see how it could have been done more compellingly than this. When he and Bob find out about the Bluntman and Chronic compellingly than this. When he and Bob find out about the Bluntman and Chronic movie, their motivation initially is to get their cut of the cash. But upon being shown the insidious internet commentary about it, Jay's mission turns to one of rage. I'm gonna kill all those fucks. And pride, as they quickly shift from trying to profit from the movie to wanting it completely shut down, worrying about the harm it'll cause their good names. Affleck gets a good response line to this, "I don't know how good your names are." Over the film, Jay falls in lust, then love, at least the closest emotion to love he can reach. But getting the girl at the end doesn't involve any specific sacrifice or grand romantic gesture on his part. Jay's the same dope going into the movie as he is coming out. They don't shoehorn a character arc in for him. They don't make him have any sort of epiphany or learn a lesson. Jay is still Jay. And that feels the most appropriate. Keeping Jay and Silent Bob in character for the entire film is all well and good. But that ultimately means the shtick starts to get tired. I talked about how perfect they were utilized in Dogma, as comic characters sitting off to the side of the main storyline, getting in their joke lines and even helping out in the actual plot in the end. Here, it just becomes overexposure, with them front and center solo for an entire feature film. Since Jay and Bob are on this cross-county trip mostly by themselves, they don't really interact directly with a lot of people for most of the runtime, with a lot of their brushes with other characters being just for a brief scene. Part of the fun in Dogma was having characters talking back to Jay's nonsense, but we barely get any of that at all in Strike Back. It also doesn't help that Jay has to carry the movie himself since he has to talk to a mute character the entire time, which makes all of his dialogue feel like it's inside of an echo chamber. This isn't a knock on Jason Mewes, who plays Jay as effectively as ever, but there's just not enough of a character there to make him a compelling focal point for 90 minutes. When it comes to stories about dopey comic duos, you can lean on their personalities in reaction to different situations like Beavis and Butthead, or make the scenarios they're in eccentric and crazy, like the Bill and Ted movies. Strike Back does a little of both, but doesn't go far enough in an interesting direction with either to really stand out. Around the middle of the country, Jay and Bob run into Justice, played by Shannon Elizabeth, an animal rights activist traveling to a testing facility to liberate a trapped orangutan. Unbeknownst to them, she's actually a thief, planning on robbing the neighboring diamond exchange along with the rest of the girl gang, consisting of Eliza Dushku, Allie Larder, and Jennifer Schwalbach-Smith. You may notice one of these people is not like the other. Now, I certainly don't want to make any rude judgments. In all honesty, it's genuinely sweet for Kevin Smith to include his wife as a sex object in a catsuit amongst some of the hottest young actresses of the moment. Apparently, she asked him if she could play the part. This is the same man who arranged a Playboy spread of his wife and has a giant version of it framed in his house. The man loves his wife, obviously. But when you get shots of all the girls together, one of them obviously stands out. It doesn't help that they have Smith in pigtails, so her larger ears are prominently featured. Although I guess it does make sense. I think in one of his Q&As, Smith said that his wife's ears were a huge turn-on for him. You know what? It's probably best to move on. Justice is the bleeding heart of the group, While the other girls have no problem using Jay and Bob as decoys set to take the fall in their scheme since they fucking hate them, Justice feels very guilty about it. The joke is that she sees Jay as a complete innocent, despite all the obnoxious and perverted things he constantly says to her and everyone around them. The gag is clear, but we get so many scenes of her passively ignoring offensive things coming out of Jay's mouth, which combined with Elizabeth's naive performance makes Justice ends up coming off like some kind of mentally stunted simpleton. But that's not entirely the case. In her first encounter with Jay, he has an enormous erection which Bob covers with a soda cup, and Justice smiles. "Oh my God, do you get free refills with that?" There's clearly moments where she's aware of the sexual situations in commentary, but then in another scene she'll innocently ask Jay what a trouser snake is, and embrace Jay's cute nickname, Boo Boo Kitty Fuck, with an almost childlike enthusiasm. I guess Jay himself is half horny adult, half simple-minded child, so his ideal mate would be somewhat similar. But this personality, combined with the fact that most of the girl characters in these types of movies are written this way, a blank slate hottie who's charmed by the dumbass protagonist, it just completely negates any sort of investment you might have in this relationship. But none of that really matters. Justice's character, her relationship with Jay, hell, basically the entire movie, is one big joke. The girls don't really have any unique personalities or quirks because they're generic bad girl characters. Ali Larder basically flat out says it toward the end of the movie. We're walking, talking bad girl cliches. The movie is incredibly broad, with lots of characters who fall into being exaggerated archetypes. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but even a bonkers comedy benefits by having some sort of grounded element to it, some relatable character to latch onto. But there's not much of that here. The humor here also most definitely skews closer to the juvenile nature of Mallrats. There's something about Mary, we're deep into the era of the gross-out comedy, but there's nothing really outrageous in here to make it stand out on that front, just a lot of simple dick and fart jokes. In the first few minutes, we get a glory shot of Jay's bare ass farting, which didn't bode well for the rest of the film. The Golgothan and Dogma was more vile than any of the gags here. There's also an awful amount of gay jokes, both regarding actual gay sex, mostly Jay adamantly refusing to suck cock, saying Bob sucks cock, and so on, and using the term gay as a derogatory term. There's one scene this felt particularly weird in. As the girl gang is setting up their heist, Eliza Dushku and Jennifer Schwalbach give each other silent hand signals as the latter runs off to perform her job. After a beat, Shannon Elizabeth says to Dushku, "You are so gay." I truly don't get what Dushku did provoked that line. It's really strange. It's possible it meant she was saying she was literally gay, but it's never made clear that she is in the movie. And even if she was, what's the point of that line? But anyway, this sadly was just where humor was at the time, with lots of 2000s comedies, even stuff on network television, getting in their easy gay jokes or using gay as an adjective slur. Even The Simpsons did it a lot. Smith certainly comes off as an incredibly accepting figure, so I don't think he had any hateful intentions with any of this. But given the frat bro nature of the humor and the young male audience this kind of movie caters most to, I don't think this was really doing the gay community any favors. Strike Back also gets off on its meta-ness. It's the meta-est movie that ever meted. As set up in the scene at Holden's pad, the premise is Jay and Bob being outraged a movie about them is being made. Affleck posits, a Jay and Silent Bob movie? Who would pay to see that? Then he, Jay and Bob look directly at the camera, with Smith smiling. This stare at the camera joke is repeated twice. When Will Ferrell says a plot development feels like something out of a bad movie, and later, Ben Affleck, the real Ben Affleck, talks about agreeing to do a movie as a favor to a friend, since Smith was lucky enough to sink his talons into Affleck early, who by this point in his career was a huge movie star. The idea of a movie about how bad the idea of that movie is novel in concept, and one the movie openly embraces. The Will Ferrell line specifically feels like an early sign of Smith's constant defense mechanism in openly discussing how he knows he's a bad writer, director, etc. As he admits, he'll happily make the jokes about himself first before critics get a chance to. That's probably the thing I dislike most about Smith. When he says stuff like that, it doesn't read as cutely self-deprecating. It just feels like an admission that you're not confident in what you're doing. I feel like I was more receptive to this kind of humor when I was younger, but I'm not as keen on it now. It's good for a piece of art, especially a comedic one, to have a sense of humor about itself, but not at the expense of its own integrity. The movie literally ends with Smith's cadre of characters, Dante and Randall, Alyssa and Renee, Hooper X and Banky, walking out of the Bluntman and Chronic movie, talking about how much it fucking sucked. There's some degree of humor to the self-referential material, but it's just so harshly tearing itself down that it's hard to really laugh at it for me. A crazy thing about this movie is not only is it filled with Smith regulars making cameos, it's also got tons of appearances by comic actors in the brief window of time before they exploded in popularity and became household names. Jon Stewart, Tracy Morgan, even Jamie Kennedy, a year before his briefly successful Hidden Camera show. All these big recognizable stars, well, the first two names at least, just show up in these small roles here. The biggest of them all is Will Ferrell, 2 years before Old School, and then Anchorman after that, when he'd become the biggest comedy star in Hollywood. He plays Marshall Willenholly, a federal wildlife officer who assigns himself in charge of the Jay and Silent Bob manhunt, believing it's his jurisdiction because of their orangutan prisoner. You can pretty easily imagine what his character is. Bumbling, slightly awkward, a yelling and whining man-child, the kind of persona you'd see in dozens of future Will Ferrell movies, is in its primordial form here. I'm not a big fan of Ferrell's work in general. He got 1 or 2 chuckles out of me. His genuinely surprised that was an incredibly daring escape after Jay and Bob retreat down a sewer pipe is pretty funny. But he doesn't really come off as a highlight of the movie for me. Once Jay and Bob finally get to Hollywood, we get even more guest star appearances. They run through the set of a fake Scream 4, where Shannon Doherty unmasks Ghostface to reveal he's just the orangutan. Director Wes Craven also appears, who gives a sweet, very much not an actor performance. The market research says people love monkeys. This was part of a weird Miramax crossover where Jay and Silent Bob had a cameo in Scream 3 the year before. For some reason, Chris Rock appears as the director of the Bluntman and Chronic movie, where his only joke is him screaming about how everyone on set is white and he's black. It's sort of like Hooper X from Chasing Amy, except without the joke of him using the militant Black Power character as a persona. There's also some casting couch jokes that haven't aged well too. And then there's Mark Hamill, who appears as the evil cockknocker, accompanied by a freeze frame with text on the screen. Hey kids, it's Mark Hamill, who, after Silent Bob uses the Force to grab his own weapon, in a Mallrats callback, engages in an all-out duel. At this point, realism has been handily tossed out the window, and we've gone from self-indulgence to Kevin Smith wish fulfillment. But there's still part of me that can't help but feel a little good about a scene like this. 10 years earlier, Kevin Smith was some nobody kid from Jersey, living at home with his mom, watching his Star Wars videotapes, and now he's directing and starring in a movie where he gets to shoot a lightsaber fight with Luke Skywalker himself. What a personal success story for him. Jay and Bob spend a lot of time being chased around the movie lot by security, which is unfortunate that it inevitably makes me think of one of the best movies ever made, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. They even hijack a bike at one point, so there's no way this wasn't a deliberate reference. They end up taking the places of their on-screen counterparts Jason Biggs and James Van Der Beek in one of the best lines. Upon finally showing up in their superhero outfits on the elaborate Bluntman movie set, after a big epic music cue, Jay remarks, "Boy, this must have set them back a couple $100." Then we get the Mark Hamill fight. Marshall, Willenholly, and Justice show up, then the other girls show up, and they get into a shootout. Also, Shannon, Elizabeth, and Eliza Dushku have a cat fight that's really embarrassing. Our conflict is resolved by Jay and Bob finally encountering Banky Edwards, who agrees to give them 2/3 of his salary for their troubles. He ups that offer himself from half, which I don't quite understand. Maybe he was covering his ass out of fear Jay and Bob could sue him for not paying them in the first place. But it's not really conveyed that way, so I really don't know. Justice gives herself and the other girls up to Will and Holly in exchange for a reduced sentence. She and Jay kiss, the Bluntman movie comes out, and everybody hates it, but who cares? We have a big dance party ending with Morris Day and the time. The plotting of this movie is so tight, it's like a Swiss watch. My favorite moment of the movie is actually towards the ending. Despite Jay getting the girl and Bob getting the monkey, they're still pissed about those online commenters. What can they do? Use all their Bluntman money to fly all across America, maybe even the world, track down the anonymous keyboard warriors who defamed them, and beat the living shit out of them. It's a really funny sequence. Going door to door with a giant stack of papers, with Bob dramatically thumbing through and pointing at a page for Jay to read back a scathing post to the author. Plus, they're pummeling like 11-year-old boys to start with, which is great. Maybe the most extreme, comedic moment of the movie. Smith was tuned into the world of online posting at a very early time, especially in depicting it in a major motion picture. It kind of blew my mind when Holden's showing off the 2000-era moviepoopshoot.com, which felt like such a time capsule for me, remembering back to early internet web pages. Each individual comment was its own page. The early internet was wild. The concept of someone fantasizing about finding where someone who said some shit about them on Twitter lives and beating them up is maybe even more relevant now than it was 20 years ago. Although you can also read it in a darker light when you think of real-life instances of swatting and actual violence resulting from some dumb internet argument someone had. But just like a lot of this movie, it was a more innocent time, so it was nice to look back at a time when the people ranting online mostly were just a bunch of preteen boys or huge nerd lingers playing tough guy, and to see them get mercilessly beaten for it. In one of Kevin Smith's Q&A specials, there was a bit where Smith was talking about his mother's reactions to all of his movies. When it came to Strike Back, all she could say was that it was really cute and that he and Mewes ran around a lot. Which, in a way, I feel, is the most charitable thing you can say about this movie. It feels like a film that everybody had fun making, like when you see behind the scenes of a shitty comedy and everybody's cracking up and you're baffled like, what the hell are they laughing at? But I guess I have enough goodwill left for Kevin Smith that I just can't hate this movie. I certainly don't think it's good. There's a lot of it that just doesn't work, with a whole bunch of jokes that seem lame at best or offensive at worst. But even despite it being ever so slightly shoved up its own ass, Smith is aiming to please his audience, and it's clear that he has. So who am I to argue with the effectiveness of the film? It's definitely a refrain that would be applicable to some of his future movies, which is why at times they feel like Teflon to criticism. I definitely rank it above Mallrats, since I find Jay, flawed as he is, a much more palatable protagonist than Brody, and there are a few clever ideas and alright jokes in here that keep it from being a total disaster. For the hardcore View-esque fans, this was an absolute dream, that when it was released was intended to be a fond farewell to these characters and the View-esque universe. And Kevin Smith crafted the perfect goodbye gift for his most devoted followers. The movie even closes after the credits where God, Alanis Morissette, closes the book on the View-esque universe, so this felt as definitive as it got at the time. Smith felt it was time to move on, but it wouldn't be long before he took one more trip to the well. More on that later, but for now, Snoochie Boochies, Little Noochies. Directed by Kevin Smith, written by Kevin Smith, produced by Scott Moore, starring Jason Mewes, Kevin Smith, Eliza Dushku, Shannon, Elizabeth, Will Ferrell, Schleiler, Jason Lee, Chris Rook, cinematography, Jamie Anderson, edited by Scott Moore, Kevin Smith. Music by James L. Venable, production companies Dimension Films, Miramax Films, View-esque Productions, distributed by Miramax Films, release date August 24, 2001. Running time 104 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $22 million, box office $33.8 million. So guys, this is their view of Jay and Silent Bob's Strike Back movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.